6, 8 months. And so we're excited about what's going on. I'm looking at the names that are popping up, even though I'm not seeing your smiling faces this Friday morning. But I'm looking at the names that's popping up, and I recognize a lot of you over the years. As I was introduced I've been doing this for a long time in South Carolina. PBIS, many of you from the AWARE grant. Some of you know that I chair the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference each year in Myrtle Beach, and some of you have attended that. So really, really happy to be here, and I'm going to get started because we got a long morning. I'm going to cover a lot of territory. Some of this territory we're going to go into pretty good depth on. Other territory, other things we're going to talk about are going to be we won't go quite so deep, and those will be topics that we have an opportunity to explore further later on. But really what I'm talking about here today is, like Kim said, what do we do in the classroom? How do we do a good job there with our students? But how do we relate that to other interventions and other things that we do school-wide, connecting this whole idea? And we've got a lot of lectures about this over the years. And I'm going to hit my share button now, and hopefully my my PowerPoint will come up. Let's see, get that up and hit share. If I'm doing this right. I got it all on one, so once we get it going. All right, I'm gonna have to have Dana help me, or excuse me, not Dana. Yeah, Dana help me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see your share button at the top, or on my screen it's at the top?
I do, up here on top right.
Yes.
Yes.
You can go ahead and select the share content. You'll see a button that says include sound. Select that.
All right, we're working on it. Include sound. Yes, indeed.
Yes.
I don't really have anything there. There we go.
Okay.
And window.
Then select your presentation. Either from it should be your window.
There we go. Now we got it. Thank you. All right. Hopefully we got the PowerPoint up. We have the slideshow up.
Oh, there it is. You need to put it into presenter mode.
Thank you. There you go. Presenter mode, presenter view, and from the beginning. Okay, fantastic. All right, good deal. So here we go. As I was introduced, I've done a lot of work. I chair the conference. I also do work with the Medical University of South Carolina, and I've been consultant to a lot of different things. So enough of that. Let's get started. First of all, I try to do what we're all supposed to do. And whenever you start out, when you start out your classes, we need to set what our expectations are. And so here we're going to be responsible, respectful, be kind, which includes laughing at all my jokes. Okay. So I know I'm getting a lot of laughing there, though, even though I can't hear you. So those are our expectations for the session. We're going to break this up into three parts, okay? And we're going to have 3 50-minute parts. I might go a little faster. We'll have to see. We're going to try to get you out of here. This is a long morning, I know. We're going to try to make it as entertaining as possible, keep you engaged. And when we unmute the microphones, I do want folks to be able to ask questions. We can do it in the chat, but I really prefer if we actually go ahead and speak. So I see a hand raised from Madison. Go ahead.
Unmute.
There you go.
Hey, so my Greenview team was wondering, are you going to send a copy of this PowerPoint to everyone that's attending this meeting today?
Absolutely. We'll get the PowerPoint sent out. What I did is when you do a PowerPoint to last for 3 sections, it's pretty lengthy. So what I will do is I'll break it back into the sections and you'll get it. The Padlet that was mentioned is available. I'm going to refer to a number of things in the morning that are in the Padlet. So if you can actually look at them, open up that as we go along, that would be helpful, and we'll make sure you get everything. And in fact, we'll be adding some things even that I don't mention now, but may come up in future sessions that'll be available to you. So that's great. So here's what we're going to do. First part, we're going to talk a little bit about PBIS, MTSS. the whole alphabet soup there, and we'll talk about that in some detail. And then we're going to introduce a training on classroom management. And we have to start in the classroom because that's where everything begins, even talking about other interventions. Quite often in these kinds of trainings, you hear people talk about tier 2 and tier 3, but they don't connect it back. And what I'm going to try to do today is show you how this all works together in a very practical way. I'm going to try to make it as practical as possible. I'm going to stay away from just theory. Obviously, we have to talk a little bit about that. But what I'm going to try to do today is give you things that you can take and use in your school this afternoon. And hopefully I'll be able to do that. And that's one of the things I'm going to want to talk about at the end. Is this information presented in a way that's going to be useful to you? Because we need to make sure that's the way it's done. The second part is going to be teacher self-checks on how they can do better job in the classroom, and then also how the classroom and best management practices come back to haunt them, if you want to call it that, with their evaluations. So we're going to try to really make this, there's a reason why you ought to do these things in the classroom, and then how those all connect to the school-wide initiatives, specifically tier 2. And so this is what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully we'll be able to cover it all. So actually, before I do this, I know everybody here is connected with stronger connections, but I want to know who we have in the audience. So let's raise our hands if you would, and then you can put it down. How many classroom teachers do we have in the audience? And maybe we can get a kind of count on that. You can help me with that, Kim. And
good morning. This is Greenview Elementary School. We have Mr. Manguel, our Spanish teacher. We have a 4th grade teacher, Miss Cassie. Mr. Manguel, Ann Myers and Miss Ethel.
Okay, so we got administrators and teachers there. Any other good examples who we have if we have a group? Help me out. You can do it by raising your hand.
I see.
Again, trying to get a sense of what we have.
Yeah, I'm looking at social workers, student success administrator. We have principals, social workers, program manager and behavior health, and MTSS facilitator.
Fantastic.
Teachers, social workers. So yeah,
we're covering the waterfront.
Social workers. Yes.
Okay, a lot of social workers. I love social workers. Social workers, because of their training, understand how to work across a variety of different disciplines. Other people do too, but social workers are really trained to do that. So I love my social workers out there. Thank you. All right, so we get a sense. We really have we're really going across the territory. That's great. That is great. Here's something I'm going to help you with. One of the problems we have in the schools, particularly when we talk to school and school-wide systems, is everybody thinks, oh, I'm a teacher. I haven't been trained as a school psychologist or a behavior intervention. I don't admit interventionist. I don't know how to do those things. Or somebody who's not in the classroom will say, well, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not sure how we need to do that. We have to share with each other those things that are going on. And the systems that I'm going to show with you today try to connect everybody with what's going on in the school. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So I'm glad we have this broad group of folks. We can work together. We can understand the other jobs that are not our job, but that we connect with. And that's what we have to do. And that's one of the goals of this specific meeting. So we can all see how these connections are made across the school, but then up and down the tiers as well, in a practical way, not just theory, in a practical way. So we're going to talk about that for the most of the morning. That's really the key to what we're doing. Happy to see such a large group of different kinds of professionals in our meeting today. Thank you all for being here. All right. We had several schools shout out, which I really like. So we're going to do that again. what in your school, I want to hear from you. What are some, and you can do a combination of putting it in the chat or go ahead and raising your hand and speaking. What are the biggest behavioral issues in your school, or if you're at the district level in your district? Let's hear about what some of those are. Because I want to tailor this to your problems that you're having or the issues that you're facing.
Dr. Stevens, do you want them to unmute themselves?
They can unmute themselves, or if they put it in the chat, if you would keep your eye on the chat and read those out when you get a chance, if either way,
Okay. All righty.
giving everybody a
Kimberly
chance for
Bassett?
feedback. Yep.
I will suggest that because it is recorded, that you have participants raise their hand, and Kimberly, you can ask them to come off mute.
Great idea. Thank you. Anything in the chat? What are the biggest issues you're facing around
Not seeing
behavioral
anything
health?
yet. Low academic performance, gang initiation,
Ooh, okay.
extreme behavior in the classroom that include escape, physical aggression, and more with 3 to 6-year-olds. A
Okay.
lot of aggression, quick to anger and explode.
Okay. Wow. All right.
School
That's a good
refusal, aggression, defiance, low
defiance.
motivation, disrespect.
Okay. Fantastic. That's not fantastic. That's terrible. But we're gonna
Right.
address some of those things.
And home environment. Let me add that one too.
Environment, right. One of the we're not going to do it in this session. One of the sessions we're going to talk about in the future is, and most of you are familiar with this, the social workers certainly are, is methods by which we can understand the home environment, the community environment, what's coming into the school, and we'll look at things like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and things such as that actually make a difference and truly affect the children and what goes on with them in the school, so impact us directly. Not going to go into all those things today, but we're going to look at some things that are going to address those specific things. Next question I have down there is, let's talk a little bit about the barriers. What prevents you from addressing some of those behavior issues? We all talk about it, and I think I know where this is going to go, but I'd like to hear from the different schools. What's keeping you from improving the behavioral health of your students? Same thing. You can raise your hand or type it in the chat. You have any?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, while we're thinking on that one, I will give you a
Parental
second one.
involvement. Okay, parental
Oh, for
involvement.
involvement. Absolutely. Okay.
Consistency with interventions.
Mm. Mm.
Resources, parent support. Having the necessary tools to use.
Okay. All right. That kind of goes to our next question then, because I don't want to belabor this, but that last statement, what do you need to improve the behavioral health and school climate in your schools? What do you think you need to improve? And hopefully you say, we need more lectures, we need more professional development by Dr. Stevens. But other than that, that was a joke. I hope we're getting the laugh at the joke there. Boy, I really like doing these in person much better than online because I can see faces.
See, right.
But
Staff
that's okay.
buy-in. That's one response.
Staff buy-in. Okay.
Yes.
That's good. That's good. That's true. That may be the biggest fail that we have. And then let's look at the last one because we don't want to just be negative. You all work very hard and you do have successes. So does anybody have something that's worked real well recently that they want to share with the other folks? Let's go out off of the screen with something positive. Something that worked for you. Oh, now we're really silent.
I don't know. That staff buy-in keeps coming up. Okay, so here we go.
Okay.
Incentives, parent
Ince-
communication,
Okay.
understanding the first then concept and accurately using it.
Okay. Good deal. All right. Those are some good examples. And we're going to touch on those. So that's great. All right. Fantastic. It's important for us to, as we go on this morning, please feel free to share. Raise your hand and unmute and say it verbally or type it into the chat box. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, continuing on. We know that we have here, we're going to be talking about Tier 1 and Tier 2 specifically. This will connect with Tier 3. We're going to talk about everything. And in here, we have teachers, administrators, counselors, social workers. I don't know if we have any nurses or not, but this is what I heard when you all introduced yourself as to what we have. So that's exciting. This is great. Okay. I want to talk about systems in the school. You know, I can go into a school and most of you can as well. And pretty quickly, once you get into the building and observe, you can tell if the systems aren't operating very well. That's where you have teachers working independently. You got a lot of, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. The other one's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you get a lot of finger pointing and things like that. And that's usually an indication that the systems aren't doing well. And so one of the things we talk about now, and the newest alphabet term, although don't get hung up on what these things are called, is this idea of an integrated systems framework. And we all know that we are sitting in schools. We have folks coming in from that are part of the school district. In some cases, we have folks coming in from external to the school district, like the Department of Mental Health or mentoring groups, or sometimes the social workers I used in this example come from the outside as opposed to being employees of the district or the school. But we have all these folks coming in, and we all talk about how poor communication, and we end up in silos. And then the other thing that occurs is in these cases, quite often all the communication has to go through the school office, the principal, the administration. More often than not, has to go through the school secretary. But we really have this siloed kind of thing. And we've all had this conversation, so we know that we feel this way a lot. I think what has happened over the last 20 years, and I was very involved with implementing PBIS initially in the state, also involved with the MTSS. And what has occurred is this: we now have the same kind of idea, and we are all aware of the tiered interventions, the triangle. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I know that you all are familiar with it. But unfortunately, we're still sort of divided. There's some communication back and forth. It's better, but we still, have to go up and down to the school leadership, maybe the school leadership team, and so we have an improvement. But I think these days people talk about being in a silo. I think we're all on our own triangle, and so what occurs is we all are talking about the tiered levels and students that 80% of the students are need these kinds of interventions, 15% need these kinds of interventions, 5% need these kinds of more individual interventions. And we're all using the same language, but we're still not communicating with each other. So rather than being in silos, I contend we're better, but we're all on our own triangle, and we don't do as good a job communicating as possible. And of course, where we want to be is an integrated system where everybody is communicating well with each other, and we can see that we have communication back and forth between all these folks. The schools apply the three-tiered logic across the school, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And this is the idea of having these teams. I know that there's an MTSS team coordinator or two on this call, and that's really what the goal of that is about. Now, again, I don't care whether you call it PBIS, RTI, ISF, or whatever. I'm going to jump to this slide first. Hold on a minute. I don't care if we call it any of these things. The idea is we all have to get on the same system. So don't get hung up about the initials, okay? We started out this thing with RTI, which was academic, and we know the state of South Carolina, specifically the State Department, really pushes this concept of the RTI, which is the academic side of a tiered system. We know that PBIS was implemented not real well 20 years ago. There's been a lot of concerns about PBIS, the way it was rolled out. We overemphasized the reward systems, which were important, but PBS kind of got the bad rap of being, oh, that's where you give the kids prizes. And it's so much more than that. We know that if you take the behavior and the academics, we've tried to put those together into this concept of the MTSS system. And then addressing some of the comments you made when we get on here recently, we're seeing more and more issues, more severe issues, which are actually more than behavioral health. Sometimes they're mental health issues. And this is where we got into the adverse childhood experiences and all that. And all that becomes this idea of ISF, or the Interconnected Systems Framework. They all fall under that umbrella. Again, Ms. Smith, Kim Smith, is going to have, under the Stronger Connections grant, certain vocabulary that you all use, but don't get, use it appropriately for your reports and those kinds of things. But let's not get hung up philosophically about, is it RTI, is it MTSS, is it PBIS, is it ISF? That's not the important thing. The important thing is that the systems work. Okay, so let's make sure that we think about that. I'm going to jump back here for a second. Here's your first assignment, group. Everybody, I want every school to think about this. Included in the Padlet is a handout called the Working Smarter Matrix, and where every school needs to start. And now is the time to start thinking about next school year. It'd be useful this school year, but we all know we're now started the spring semester, and very quickly we're going to be starting to make our plans for the next school year. Is the school leader, the school administration, and their leadership team need to sit down and think about all of the teams that we have available. Here's one of the problems. When I go out and I say we need to do these things in the schools, what occurs quite often is, well, we can't do one more thing. We have initiative overload. We don't have time to do anything else. Well, one of the problems is we're not working smart. And the first thing the school needs to do, and this is a practical thing that you must do, is write down every team you have. Who's on that team? What is the purpose of this team? What is it supposed to accomplish? Who's the target audience of the team? Is it students? Is it parents? We heard a lot about parent involvement a little bit ago. Is it the teachers themselves? We all understand we have to train our teachers. When does the team meet? Who's on the team? You know, we got the 20%, 80% rule. We all know that occurs. 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. And so what happens when Miss Smith, who is the key person, is on 3 different teams and they're meeting at the same time, and she can't be there, can't be in the other. I see some smiles out there because you know that happens. And so what has to be done at the leadership level initially is what are the teams that we have? Because I'll tell you what, you're going to be able to combine some teams, you're going to be able to cut some teams, and by doing that, you can work smarter and you can stop this problem. Oh, it's one more thing on top. No, it's not one more thing on top. We're going to be more effective in what we're doing. So this is something that every school needs to do. I would contend every district needs to do it at the district level. What are the teams that we have? And go through an exercise of whatever they might be. You have leadership, you have MTSS, you have safety, you have others, Sunshine Committee, the SST team or the Tier 2 team, whatever it might be. What do we have? Who's on them? What do they do? When do they meet? And let's get this structured well within each school and within the district. And then you include, how important is this one? Because what you might find is, you know what, we got a committee that, yeah, we should have it, but it's not very important. So we're only going to reduce how much they meet or something like that. And where is it on the principal's priority? Because at the end of the day, administrators, I understand, as much as I love teams, the principal of school is still the principal. And as you saw on those triangles that I just showed you in silos, at some point, the school leadership, the administration does impact how these things are done. So in your handouts is one of these things. And man, we're already at 9:30, so we're going to need to move quickly because I want to make sure you all get breaks. Okay, moving quickly. I want you to think about interventions in your school. And right now, think about the interventions. I was going to take a minute, maybe I will. No, we won't because we are running a little bit behind. Think about the interventions in your school and think about interventions at every level, at every level. So I'm not going to ask you to call them out, but right now on your piece of paper, can you think of an intervention at the universal level, at tier 2 or at tier 3? Everybody think about that for a minute. I'm going to get a sip of coffee while you do. Okay. So you're thinking about what you have at each tier. And we know, for example, the positive behavior support, reward systems, things like that, some curriculum around behavior like Second Step or other classroom management programs. Those are things that are universal. Tier 2, we have some groups. And at the end of the day, if you're interested in these groups like check in, check out, check and connect, social skills groups, we are going to get to that. That's in the third time period that we're going to have today. And then you have the tertiary, and that would be our counselors, if we have mental health workers in the school that are doing clinical work one-on-one. So we understand that at the different levels, universal is interventions for all students, and they are interventions. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Secondary is for small group, and tertiary is for individuals. But let me say something here. Tier 2 is the toughest one to understand, and actually there can be shades of tier 2. Universal is something that's done for all kids. Secondary is something that's done for a small group that doesn't require individualization of the activity. So quite often there are things that we do for students, maybe a mentoring group. Yes, the student has a mentor, which is a one-on-one activity, but the group is set up for a group of students to have mentors. The rules are set up for a group of students. That makes it a tier 2 intervention, even though the intervention may appear to be more individual. So we have to understand that when we're talking about different interventions. Tertiary is when a plan is designed individually. No other student has it. The training that goes into it, the activities that are in are unique to that child. That's a tertiary intervention. So sometimes secondary interventions can occasionally look like tertiary. It's not that critical that we understand, but you need to understand that, in fact, when you're doing things for a group and you're setting up structure, and this is important for the administrators, that you're setting up a structure for a tier 2 intervention. Okay, that was more theory. I do want to remind everybody that tiered interventions is not going up the triangle and checking box. Progressive discipline is not tiered interventions. Because what we're trying to do there, and we all see it, we're trying to check the boxes, and when we check enough boxes, we get to send them to the office that does the student hearings, and we get them put in the alternative school or whatever it might be. That's not what this is. That's not what interventions are about, and that's not what we're trying to do. So a lot of schools said, oh, well, we'll put in progressive discipline, that solves our tier problem. It does not. That's not the same thing. Okay, looked at that one. So we're shifting paradigms. We tried to explain this with PBIS, but we didn't do a very good job when we rolled it out 25 years ago. When we are starting, what we're trying to do is not say that we have a child who's in the red zone. We don't want to say we have a kid who's a high flyer. In our conversations, we sometimes slip and say those things, but really what we need to be saying is we have children that need tier 3 interventions or tier 2 interventions, or we have a student that needs supplemental or additional supports. And so rather than saying that we're having interventions to Johnny and Billy or to the red zone kids, we're trying to have interventions and prevention instruction for all the students. We're trying to identify which students need the help and using the programs that are available. So we try to shifting the way we're thinking here, and that's this paradigm shift for behavioral health that we're familiar with. And we've been talking about this shifting the mindset for a long time. Let me say this very clearly, and again, I'm still in philosophy, we want to get out of this, but this does not mean we don't have consequences, folks. It does not mean that. And we're going to see in just a minute what I mean. But we do have to think about how we put interventions in place. So when we started rolling out PBIS, we spent a lot of time talking about what are the most important things we do for PBIS. And here's what we have. And this is again, I don't care whether you call it PBIS or ISF or whatever. These 6 concepts are the same around behavior for all of them. So this is what we need to do. It has to be done with a team. Our teams have to get together and communicate with each other, and all the different participants on the team must be included, including the teachers, the social workers, the school psychologists. They all must be represented on teams so they can communicate across those triangles, the silos, right? But we're all on different triangles, and let's get that one triangle created. The school and also in the classroom. See, everything I'm saying right now is also taking place in the classroom, teachers. What are your expectations? We have to have a series of expectations that we can teach the kids. And that's a critical piece. Some schools do a very good job at this, some don't. I will tell you, teachers, if you have a school that doesn't do a good job with school-wide expectations, you need to create expectations in your classroom. If the school does do a good job, then what we do in the classroom should be connected to the school. But the most important one is number 3, is we have to teach how we want the kids to do. In PBIS, they use this teaching matrix thing. And again, that's a great tool to use, but it is just a tool. And we got hung up when we were rolling out PBIS, we got hung up with a matrix. I would contend that many of the schools that you sit in, there are matrices from the old PBIS days hanging on the wall that never get referred to. If that's the case, take them down. They're not being helpful. The other thing, I go into classrooms all the time and they'll have the PBIS expectations or the MTSS expectations on one wall. And then they'll have the expectations for being a good citizen from the Rotary Club that's hanging on another wall. And we'll have another set of expectations that came from someplace else, maybe your professional, the English group or the social studies group on another wall. Take all those down. What are the expectations? What are the 3 to 5 expectations that you have for your students in your classroom? 3 to 5 expectations you have for your students in your school, and let's everybody use them. That's what PBIS says. And whether you use a matrix or you have I don't care, but everybody has to know what the expectations are, and then we have to teach them to the kids. And what happens is that, somebody mentioned consistency earlier. We don't make ourselves consistent, and that's the biggest problem. So if you're in a school and you're getting a ton of different messages, particularly with kids that are coming from situations where mixed messages allow them then to get around the rules, the kids are going to do it. The path of least resistance. That's being an adolescent. And that's even being a 3, 4, and 5-year-old. Don't even have to be an adolescent for that. So let's tighten up, folks. Tighten up our schools. That's what we need to do. Then obviously we have number 4. What are we going to do to encourage the students? This is the acknowledgement system. I don't like to use the term reward. I prefer acknowledge. We have to have an acknowledgement system. Acknowledgements work. We have to tell the kids are doing a good job. Back in 20 years ago, rolling out PBIS, this is what the big objection was, because we spent so long talking about rewards and token economies and how those things work. And then we'd have teachers stand up, oh, we're just bribing the kids. And I can remember going into one school and the teacher stood up and said, you know, the kids shouldn't have to be bribed to do what they're supposed to be doing. They shouldn't need this kind of acknowledgement. This is their job to be in school and they should do it. And I always laugh because about a month later, I was at a school board meeting and the exact same teacher stood up in a school board meeting and said, you know why the morale is so bad in our school district? It's because we never get told we're doing a good job. And, and you know, my head exploded because I said, wait a minute, you're getting paid and you're a teacher and you should get told you're doing a good job. We appreciate the teachers. But at the same time, you don't think your students need that same kind of positive reinforcement. But we have to do it smart. And the token economy is a great way to do it, but it's also very difficult to do. We won't go in, you know, we can create more problems than we solve with token economies if they're not rolled out right. I will do in the future, we will have a whole session on how to use rewards and acknowledgments. And we can take a couple of 3 hours just talking about that, how to do it effectively. Because quite often we put in systems that actually are counterproductive and make behavior worse. We all have been in the schools that have a token economy and they have the school bucks or whatever it is, and the kids with the worst behavior are walking around with all the reward chits in their pocket. So it hadn't been implemented properly. We'll talk about that, but needs to know it's a problem. We have to have procedures for discouraging violations. That's consequences. Consequences are just as important as the acknowledgments. Now, the problem that we have is the consequences that we choose are not effective, and in some cases actually encourage more misbehavior. We all know the situations where you know, Johnny is acting out in class, in the elementary class, and he gets sent down to the office. Maybe Johnny can't read well, and they're getting ready to read in the class, so he acts out so he doesn't have to read, and so he gets sent down to the office, and he's sitting there with the school school secretary in the office, and you know, Miss Smith, and she's got a bowl of candy on her desk. And so every time she turns his head, the child's stealing the candy. Every single adult that walks into the office pats him on the head and says, Johnny, what are you doing here? Well, Johnny's got a choice. Yeah, he was sent to the office, but he could be in the classroom where he's being embarrassed in front of his peers for not being able to read well, or he can be down in Miss Smith's office, down in the school office, swiping candy, and every adult that comes in and pats him on the head. Where would you rather be? I know where I would rather be. I'll be down in the office every time, even though that's a quote unquote consequence or a punishment. So we really need to think about our procedures for discouraging. We have to think about motivation, and we're going to be talking about motivation a lot going forward here. Okay, and then we have to monitor and evaluate. I'm not going to need to go much more quickly because we're really running out of time. All right, progress monitoring, which I just mentioned. We have to understand data. And there are two kinds of data we have to collect. Progress monitoring and our tools to measure how well we're implementing. You will be given tools by Kim as a result of this grant. How well are we implementing the things? And I don't know what they are, but you'll be given something. How well are we implementing what we're supposed to be doing for the grant, for the award? And you need to do those things. Are we doing a good job? And there are a number of other tools that are out there. There's the ISF implementation tool. There's something that I shared with you called the Team Implementation Checklist, very much like that one I gave you earlier, something called the TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. There are a lot of them out there. If you're a school, a mental health counselor in the school, there's something called the School Connectedness Review. You don't need to use all of them, but you need to be checking as a school, what are you doing to make sure we're implementing our tools properly? Interventions fail for only two reasons. We're doing the wrong intervention. We didn't pick the right one, and you do that based on the data of the child. Do we have good data we're looking at? Or the second reason they fail is we didn't implement them with fidelity. So if you're doing interventions in your school and they're not working, there's only two reasons why you're not working. You're not analyzing the data about your kids properly. They're not in the right intervention, or we're not doing the intervention right. That's the only two reasons it can fail. So this is the data that you have to collect. Progress monitoring, is this the right data for that? Is this the right intervention for the child? Or are we not implementing it properly? And the implementation side is the side that there'll be tools that come to you from Kim and the grant that say, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? The other side, the data problem solving, is going to be another lesson that we have. That's another 2 or 3 hour lesson, because in South Carolina, we do a great job of admiring our data, but we really suck at problem solving with our data. And so we're going to do a whole presentation for you down the road for the schools. How do we problem solve with the data that we have to make sure we have the right interventions for our kids? And I'm going to give you a shortcut for doing some of that for Tier 2 this morning, and also for your classroom management. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about essential behavior and management practices, including Tier 2 in the classroom. We're going to talk about the school-wide Tier 2, but we have to do a better job in our classrooms for Tier 2 with the teachers. And our teachers need to understand, and this is what some of the frustration I heard when we asked what the biggest problems were when you started out. Our teachers don't know how to intervene in the classroom. You know, Miss Smith, an administrator, you know, Miss Smith has Johnny who keeps breaking pencils in the classroom. And she finally gets so tired of it, she sends him to the office for breaking pencils in the office. Drives the administration crazy when that happens. And then the other side of the coin is I sent him to the office, and then he comes back and the office didn't do anything to help me solve that behavior. The problem here is we have to teach Miss Smith how to, in the classroom, how to get Johnny to quit, to deal with this behavior, to get him to quit breaking pencils. This defiant behavior, this disruption we talked about. Now, another lesson we have to consider is how we define misbehavior and behavioral health issues. I'm going to tell you that we can't continue to say defiance and disrespect, because they mean different things to different people. In your schools, please, please, one of the first things you can do right now is not to accept defiance and disrespect on office referrals. Make the staff, whether it's a teacher or a librarian or the person monitoring the playground, say specifically what the behavior was. Disrespect and defiance doesn't work. And one of the reasons is we all know we have more punitive discipline for some of our students, and it's done under the guise of defiance or disrespect, which is not well defined, and that causes for this inequality of exclusionary practices. You've all heard about it, it's a real thing. So the first step to getting around that is you don't accept defiance or disrespect. You make the referrals spell out what the actual behavior was. He threw a stone at somebody, or he broke a window, or he kept breaking pencils when I asked him to stop. And you're going to know why we need to do that in just a minute, because we're going to, again, get back to function a little bit. And our teachers have to know how to do this in the classroom. So Miss Smith has to learn she has to handle breaking pencils in the classroom and not send Johnny to the office. On the other hand, we have Coach Smith at the other end of the hallway, and there's a fight in the back of the classroom, and he feels like, oh, I can handle that. I'm going to take these kids out on the playground and make them run laps until they puke, and I don't need to send them to the office. Well, that's wrong too, because the office needs to know that there was a fight. That's important information, who's fighting and why, particularly when we hear things like we got increased gang behavior. That's important to know. So both those teachers are wrong. So we have to do a better job with this. Teach Miss Smith how to handle things in the classroom appropriately. Tell Coach Jones that, you know what, yes, you were able to handle it, but this is data that we need to have in the office. And we're going back to the point of data here. That's really the key. Okay. When we come back from break, I'm going to give you specifically 10 things 10 things that we're going to want to have done in the classroom, and it's also then going to allow us to create good tier 2 interventions. So this is where we are. This is exactly what we need to be thinking about. And these are the 10 things we're going to be doing a little bit of a deeper dive on, and we're going to connect it again back to function of behavior, motivation, and where we're going. So part 1 is over. I got through it. I sped up a little bit at the end there to get us right at the right break time. We have 2 minutes or 1 minute now till break time. Any questions about anything I've said? Anybody want to give me some feedback? Anything that tweaked your interest you'd like to hear something about? Raise your hand or unmute and or put it in the text box. We got about 40 seconds.
If you'd like to unmute yourself, just raise your hand and go ahead and do that.
Please
Okay,
do.
we do have good information so far.
All right.
I do not see any hands raised.
Oh, I am just doing such a great job. Nobody has any questions. That's fantastic. All right.
You're
On your
you're
break,
doing an
when you're-
awesome job. Thank you.
On your break
are.
now for 10 minutes, as you're walking around, think a little
Do
bit
we have
about
a
that.
question?
Yeah.
I did hear someone. Do we have a question?
Is there a difference in MTSS in elementary school PBIS and middle school PBIS?
Great question. It's interesting. All the levels are different, and there's no question about it. And one of the things that changes, I would say, the systems, the big. Whoop, that's my timer. The big systems, no. However, how we implement there is, and I'm going to I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next 15 minutes talking about routines and rules and how we implement that. And it's really an implementation difference, not a concept difference. But again, I'm going to try to show some of those implementation differences today. That's a great question. Thank you. We'll be talking about that. Anything else? All right. I don't want to go into your 10-minute time because you all have to go scratch your nose or whatever you need to do. So see you back here in 9.5 minutes now. Thanks. Okay. How we doing, folks?
You're doing fine, Dr. Stevens.
All right.
You can pace yourself with your time. I think you're fine. I've
Okay.
enabled the microphones and the camera. The only thing, they can come on camera, but if it affects your bandwidth or theirs, then we'll
Okay.
ask them to turn off their cameras.
All right.
I also have the
Thank
Q&A function available, so when we come back, I can tell them if they have questions, that we can put it in the Q&A as well.
Okay. Fantastic. All right, we're going to get down to nitty gritty here now, but I think we got a good setup, and I've been mentioning some things that may be possible. We talked about things down the road, and I don't want to create an expectation there. Um, and I'm not going to stop sharing because I'm set up right. So I can see you there, Kim.
Right.
But I don't want to mess with my computer. I get very nervous with the online stuff. If it's working, I don't want to touch anything.
Yeah.
It's working.
And you are being, you are still part of the recording, so this part is
Okay,
still
all
being
right.
recorded as well.
Thank you for saying that. That was a good thing to say. I am, I don't mean to preempt, but I'm mentioning a few things that could be future things, mostly to get feedback and seeing and if you kind of watch them, is this something that would be worthwhile or not? And you can do some follow up. You can say in that session you heard about problem solving, or you heard about tier 2 interventions, or heard about whatever I mentioned, and it might be a good opportunity to see if those would be good follow up sessions for down the road, whether it's me or somebody else. But anyway, all right. I'm going to go
Okay.
freshen
I'm making
my
notes.
coffee.
All righty.
Is this covering good material so far for you? I'm sorry. Are we
Oh, no, it is.
covering?
It
Okay.
is.
Good deal.
Yes.
Great. See you in a minute. Okay. All right, and almost ready to start. Going to give everybody a second or two to settle back into their chairs. Just about time. Start my timer. All right. I got my fresh cup of coffee. Have my second cup, so by the time the next break comes, I'll need it. Coffee. Uh, Fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. At the end of the last session, I showed you this slide right here. I'm assuming everybody's back, so I'm jumping in and going. Kim, do we need to say anything, Ms. Smith? If not, I'm just going to keep going.
I'll just remind participants that you have access to your cameras now. If you don't mind being part of the recording, and if it doesn't affect your bandwidth, you are free to come on camera. You have access to your microphones. We just ask that you remain muted until recognized by the presenter or myself or Ms. Smith. You also have the Q&A function that's available to those of you who are joining us via the application. I've put some information there for you as well. So let's go ahead and continue. Great job,
All
Dr.
right.
Stevens.
Fantastic. All right, so coming right before break, showed you these 10 items. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on these. And the reason why is because we're really going to use these to understand what we need to be doing school-wide and how having these practices in place will help us create secondary interventions, which is really, really critical. All right, so here we go. Before we go back to the 10, there are 5 guiding principles to behavioral health in the classroom and the school. The first one, really simple. I don't know if we have any teacher coaches on here, God bless you, but a good teacher coach is really a great behavior specialist because good teaching is our best behavior management tool. And I know we now are talking about, oh, we got kids that aren't motivated, they don't want to learn. We have to work real hard at finding out what the kids need because we know what we need to do to engage the students. Because we know the indicators of good teaching, which are instructional management and behavior management, they go hand in hand. And that's why we don't have RTI and PBIS separate anymore. That's why we have MTSS, the idea of combining, because we know that so many of the kids that have poor behavioral routines or create behavioral issues or have poor behavioral health, that we understand that they also quite often have needs around the academic side as well. And so that's why we put these together. This is not on a slide, but I'm going to talk about this separately just for a second and talk about engagement, because really that's really what we're talking about here is engagement. It's listed down here as high rates of positive engagement is important. There are 3 kinds of engagement. Psychology tells us there are 3 kinds of engagement. There's behavioral engagement, which is the lowest level. And that's the level that, we have this rule, we walk in a line, sit in our chair, we're doing those exact behaviors. Second kind of engagement is emotional engagement. And that's why schools have mascots and bands. We feel good about the school. I want to be in that club. I want to be in that band school-wide. That's what it is. But in the classroom, that's why classroom teachers say, let's raise money for the poor little child, or let's have a puppy in the classroom. We get an emotional attachment to the class and what's going on. Or we do those kinds of things. The last kind of engagement is the most critical one, and that's cognitive engagement. So I'm going to give a little exercise here for a minute now, because we're talking about engaging the students. We have rules which do behavioral engagement. We do other kinds of activities to try to emotionally get the kids engaged in the school. That helps their behavior. But the ones that we want as teachers is the cognitively engaged students. So think about, I want everybody here, because you've all taught at one time or another, even if you're not now, think about that student that you have taught that, boy, really loves to learn the information. They do the extra reading. If they get the problem wrong on their own, they'll try to get it right. They'll go back and see if they can figure it out. Or when reading time comes, they pull their book out and they do the reading. And maybe they do extra reading. And they come and ask the extra questions, the deeper questions about why something is, or how something works, or what's going on. They ask those kinds of questions. So you all have had students like that. So I want you to think about that cognitively engaged student. And to be cognitively engaged, you have to be behaviorally engaged, you have to be emotionally engaged to get to that cognitive engagement. Here's what I want everybody to think about. You all have that student in mind, right? Everybody's thinking of that student. In the school that you work in, and if you're not in the school, pick a school that you visit. In that school, what percentage of kids in that school are cognitively engaged the way we just described it? That kid who does everything they're supposed to do academically, really wants to learn, goes the extra step, takes it on themselves, maybe helps other students if they're having a problem. What percentage of kids in the school are that percentage? So everybody think about that for a second. Now, I've been doing this for 10 years, asking this question. I used to do a whole presentation, and maybe that's one we can do later about how do you best engage students. But I've probably asked this question in 500 schools in South Carolina. So if somebody here is brave, tell me if you would, and I'll tell you what I've heard from over 500 schools in South Carolina. Tell me, what percentage of the students in your school are cognitively engaged? What percentage of the student body? Anybody want to volunteer? Did we get any volunteers on that one?
Seeing 30% in the chat from
30. Oh, that's good.
20%.
That's good. We got some good schools here.
And then we have 10%, mostly high achieving students taking advanced or high school level classes in middle school.
Yeah. Okay. It's unsurprised. This may or may not be surprisingly to you. The answer that I get from South Carolina schools is somewhere between 5 and 10% for the most part. They feel like between 5 and 10% of the kids are truly cognitively engaged. And I bring this up right here because think about your school. If it's 20%, I'll use the 20% number that was there. 20% of your students really cognitively engaged. They're also the students that get the best scores on high-stake tests. So think about if you could double that number. What a difference that would make to the climate, to the behavior, to the behavioral health of the students. And I bring this up because this is another way to think about how do we want to improve our school, reduce behavior issues in the school. And here's the thing, it becomes the norm of the school. So even our students who we can't even get behaviorally engaged see that it becomes a norm of the school, and it impacts their behavior. It impacts everybody's behavior. So this idea this very first, general principle, good teaching, because of the engagement factor, is critical. And I can go into a lot of things that the teacher coaches do, and we'll talk about a few of them in just a minute. But it's a really critical issue. They go hand in hand, and that's why we have MTSS. That's why we have MTSS at this point. Okay, number two, I'm going to jump forward. Number two, we've already talked about the three-tiered prevention logic. We have prevention in the classroom that we need to think about. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We all think about, oh, we do interventions at tier 2 and tier 3. We also do interventions in the classroom. And we have to help our teachers to learn how to do them. And here's the deal. I got school psychs here. I've got social workers here. I don't know. I'm not a teacher. I'm not trained in a teacher. I'm going to ask you, when we're done with this section, to be able to go into the classroom and observe and see some things and help them based on your knowledge, based on your discipline. But I'm going to give you a tool that you can go in and say, hey, this is what I saw. So we're getting to that in just a minute. And that goes back to those 10 things. I'm going to ask you to observe 10 things. If you're a teacher, I want you to observe yourself. If you're an administrator or somebody else, I want you to observe them in light of these 10 things. And you're going to help them. We all need to understand what best practice is in the classroom. Because if you're a social worker or you're a mental health counselor in the school, you need to understand that I've counseled, I've worked with this kid, I send them back to the classroom and they get torn out of their frame because the teacher didn't understand what I did and they're not doing the prevention kinds of things that they need to do in the classroom. It's not the teacher's fault, but we need to be able to go in and look and see and work. We have to be able to work outside of our areas. Got somebody waiting in the lobby there. Okay. Number 3, link classroom to school-wide. Mentioned this earlier. You know, we talked about PBIS. Many of us have these matrices hanging around. There were some cases we're using them well. That's great. Some cases we're not. But we need to have school-wide expectations, and we also need to have classroom expectations. And that goes back to this idea I mentioned earlier. What do we take care of in the classroom? What needs to be sent to the office?
Yeah.
Hello. Somebody's not muted. All right. So school-wide expectations versus classroom expectations. We need to straighten that out, and we need to connect it to, if possible. If you are in a school that hasn't created school-wide expectations, you need to create expectations for you, for your office, for your classroom. And I say office because counselor, school counselor, or nurse, or social worker, it's not just expectations in the classroom. You have expectations for your office as well if there's no school-wide. If there are school-wide, you still have expectations, but you need to connect yours to the school-wide ones. That's what PBIS tells us. That's the important thing. So we're using the same language. You know, one of the things that people don't realize, listen to this. This is a good trick here. This is an important one. We all have teachers in your schools, even if it's the most difficult school. There are teachers that are able to do a good job with the students there. We need to share that information with each other. We need to get teachers to share their power. Because we'll have the teacher that's been there the 20 years, that they have good classroom control. We have the new teacher that's just come in. I see this a lot. I've been doing a lot of work lately with international teachers, and they come in and they don't know here what language to use, what to say. Let the experienced teacher share their power with the new teacher. What is the language they use? Share that language over with the other people. That's sharing these expectations. That's what this is. Because now, if the new teacher uses some of the same language that the old teacher uses, the teachers say, oh, now teachers are different, and a new teacher may not be able to use some of the same tricks that an old teacher used, but they can use some of the same words. and that's helpful. So get your teachers to share their power with each other. It doesn't take anything away from the one teacher. So that's just something that you need to think about. Everybody needs to think about. Psychologists can use that, administrators can use that, other teachers can use that. And you do that by these expectations. And if they're school-wide, even better. If they're not, make sure you have them for yourself. Teach social skills just like academic skills. This is another thing that PBS taught us. If we're having behavior issues, we have to teach the kids how we want them to behave. And that's not just tell them. We have to teach it. We have to stand up and use examples and show them what we mean. So we have to teach that, create lesson plans. We have to create lessons plans. And this is done everywhere. This is done on the playground, in the cafeteria, in the room. Teach them how we want them to behave. Don't just tell them, teach them. And that's going to come back up again. We're going to see it in a little bit. And then finally is the systems. I mentioned this earlier, the idea that I know you can always tell a school that has lousy systems because the adults in the building don't work well together. There are three things we have to do, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have to collect our data. And based on that data, we decide what the best practice is. The practice is the intervention. That's intervention. I should change the word practice to intervention or add intervention to it. We look at our data, we pick the practice, and then we put it in place, and that's the systems part. So the data tells us what to do. The practice, and I'm going to say this in a way that doesn't sound real good, but it'll make you understand it. The practice is what we do to the kids. That's what we're doing to the kids. The system is what we make the adults do in the building. That's all the adults. So we look at our data, we pick the best practices, and then we put a system in place to make sure it gets done right. That goes back to their two reasons why interventions don't work. You don't look at the data, so you pick the wrong practice or wrong intervention. That's one reason it fails. Or you pick the right practice, but then you don't implement it. The adults in the building don't do what they're supposed to do to get it implemented right. And that's the systems piece. So data, look at data. Practices are for the kids. Systems are for the adults in your building. And one of the problems is we tend to blame all the failure on the practices on the kids. We have to redesign what we do sometimes. We have to change how we behave in the building. I go into schools all the time and quite often get asked by principals, come and fix this kid. Come and fix this kid. And psychologists hear that, and so do social workers. Problem is we can't fix the kid. What we have to do is we have to fix, I hate to say it this way, but sometimes we have to fix the adults in the building. We have to change their behavior to change the kids' behavior. And so that's one of the things that we have to think about. And teachers, that's not saying you're not doing right. You are, but we have to make sure we're doing it properly. And we're going to talk about that now with the system, because we know that behavior is predictable. You know which you said some of the problems at the beginning, and you know which kids are going to be the ones to act out. There's no question about that. We also have to believe that behavior is changeable, because if we can't change your behavior, then we're all lost. So we have to be able to change the behavior. The environment makes a difference. How the classroom is set up, how the school is set up, affects how these kids behave. And then we also know that we can teach it. The last term is the one I'm going to start harping on more and more now, and that's function of behavior. And we're going to talk more and more about that. High school folks here, a lot of the behavior you have in kids, these kids learned in elementary and middle school. Middle school, they learned a lot of it in elementary. Elementary, you're right. A lot of this was learned at home, and we need to be able to make those changes. But I contend in high school, folks, that most of what you see is learned behavior for 11, 12 years of schooling. And when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, we're talking about a real thing. And we've trained our kids to think about themselves in those kinds of terms, the same way the criminal justice system thinks about people. And we've done that. We've done that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're bad. We just haven't understood how to best work with the kids. So there we go. All right. The 10 things. All right, I'm going to give you all an assignment now for tonight. In your Padlet, there is a document called the self-check. And this self-check can be used by you, the teachers. And that's how I would say to use it. Give it to the teachers and ask them to do the self-assessment of themselves in the classroom. But this can also be used, folks, if you are visiting classrooms, because if you're a social worker and you're visiting classrooms and you're kind of watching Johnny in the classroom or Susie in the classroom because they're on your caseload, or if you are the counselor, or if you're the school administrator. It's particularly good administrators, particularly if you're going to have to do evaluations of teachers down the road. You can use this. I know, I haven't been trained as a teacher. You can use what I'm going to show you right now as a way of helping the teacher deal with the student that you're dealing with. So you can have a common approach to dealing with them. So this is practical. It's called the self checklist. It's in the Padlet. It's one page, and it starts out by saying who the teacher is. The rater can be the teacher themselves. They should do this themselves. It should be a self check, but it could also be, and I should take the word rater off of there. It can also be an insight that you, a social worker, or somebody else who's going into that classroom to look at Johnny has to check. One of the things that I want you to do is look for the positives to negatives total. We know that MTSS, PBIS, good behavior requires a 4-to-1 positive to negative interaction. 4-to-1 is a hard level to reach. Teachers that are very, very positive are quite often at 1-to-1. So getting 4-to-1 contacts is difficult, but it can be done. And what I want you to do is to tally. Go in when you go in and watch a teacher for 5 minutes and keep track of the positive to negative interactions. And just if you're visiting the classroom, teachers, do it to yourself if you're visiting the classroom, and understand that, gee, maybe the teacher needs to be more positive with Johnny. And tell them, based on the work you're doing with them, the interventions here in the classroom need to be more positive. And so here's your assignment for tonight, everybody on here. I can't see you, but raise your hand if you have a significant other at home. Okay, you got some kind of significant other person at home. All right. I got some hands going up. When you go home tonight, before you do anything else, oh, honey, it's so good to see you. I'm so happy to see you tonight. Thank you for getting those trash cans out. Really appreciate it. Boy, that new haircut looks good. Oh, wow. You did such a good job on that for me. I want you to go home and give 4 positives before you say, why the hell didn't you take the trash can out? Before that, my tire's low on my car. You got to go out there and fix it. You were supposed to have done that already. I want you to go home and do 4 positives, and I promise you, you will have the best night ever tonight. It's a Friday night. It's date night. You go home, 4 positives to negatives, and you'll have a great evening. That's your homework assignment for tonight. It works. It works. Okay? That's your assignment. All right. Hope we got some laughs there. All right. Here are the 10 things that I showed you earlier. And these are the 10 things that we need to do. This is based on, George Sprick, George Chagai from PBIS, Randy Sprick from Champs and Safe and Civil Schools. It's also got a lot of the stuff from the first 30, Harry Wong, the first 30 days. This is the evidence-based stuff, and I want everybody to know this. And I don't care if you're a teacher or not, I want you to start to be able to recognize these things in the classroom, because it'll impact how you set up interventions with the kids. And so we're going to go through them real quick. Okay, let's see, where are we? We're at 10:23. We're doing good. Number 1, minimize crowding and distraction. Very first thing we need to do is to design the environment. Arrange the furniture so we can move around. Designate staff and student areas. That one drives me crazy. Anybody here remember the TV show WKRP in Cincinnati? Love that show. It was fantastic. I can see everybody smiling because it was a great show. And they had a character on there called Les Nessman in the news. And he felt like they had a big room that everybody had offices, and he felt like because he was a news director, he should have an office. And so he actually put tape on the floor, and he wouldn't even talk to people unless you walked up next to his desk and pretended to knock on an imaginary wall and stand at the tape open door. And we need to do that in our classrooms. What are the staff areas? What are the student areas? What are the seating arrangements? Quite often, and this goes back to our instructional managers, we've been pushing for students who work together in groups, arranging the classroom that way. I understand that. That's a good teaching technique. If you have teachers that are having classroom management issues, that may be something that we want to think about. It might be, there's a reason why classroom rows have existed for so long, because it's the best way to manage and the environment that teachers can use best to manage their students. If you have a teacher that's struggling, you might suggest changing the structure a little bit and until they get good control, and then you can go back to the sharing, grouping kinds of things that some of our instructional coaches want. But it doesn't do any good if we're not doing any teaching because of the behavior, whatever the arrangement is. So let's minimize for crowding and distraction. Have those areas that can be supervised or not. We'll move through these a little quicker. Maximize structure and predictability. This is critical. Of all the things here, next to the positive to negatives, this is the most important one. This is an intervention. Having routines is an intervention. The question that was asked right before break, routines are the critical piece to answering that question. We need routines for everything. I want 1 million routines, and this is and kindergarten teachers understand this better than anybody, but this is just the same case for kids in 12th grade. Because if you're a teacher and you don't have a routine for handing the papers back, and you're a high school teacher, how many times do the kids toss the papers back to the kid behind them, and now they're all over the floor? And now the whole thing's falling apart, and the kids are running around picking up stuff. That happens. We got to have routines for everything. We have to teach the kids how to pass the papers back, even when they're in 12th grade. We have to teach the kindergartner how to put the chair under the table. And you know what? We have to do that in middle school, because then they leave the chairs out all over the place, and then the bell dismisses and they all run out and they trip over chairs. We have to have routines for everything. And you know what the key here is? We don't need as many rules as we think, because every time you have a rule, what do you have to have? You have to have, do I hear it out there? Have to have a consequence. But if you have a routine that gets broken, you just go back and fix the routine. Routines are critical. And here's the other thing. When you go into the classroom, look at the teacher. I'm not just talking about student routines. I'm talking about teacher routines. You talked earlier about the kids coming in with a number of issues out of the community, out of the home. They don't have any structure and predictability at home and in the community. It's chaotic. So rather than the teacher today yelling, we're going to start reading from the back of the room because they're there with Johnny, or standing in the doorway and say, get your reading books out. No. Every time, and I don't care whether it's kindergarten or 12th grade, every time you're going to get the reading book out to read, the teacher walks to the front of the room. The teacher puts the book, you can't see me, but I'm putting the book on my shoulder. I'm standing in the same place. I'm looking out at the classroom. The students see me holding up the reading book, standing at the same place every single day. They now know what's going to happen next without me even saying anything. Right? I know next what's going to happen if I'm that student. And then I say, it's time to get our reading books out. So we need routines for teachers, particularly with these students that are the most difficult. Then they know what's going to happen, what's coming up next. They're not caught short. They don't flip into flight or fight because they don't know what's going on. Does this mean kids won't occasionally fight and flip into fight or flight? Absolutely. But you'll reduce it by having these kinds of routines. And even if you're not a teacher, you can understand that and say, teachers, get these routines for all the things that you want your kids to do. You should be by the end of the school year, you should be so sick of routines and routines for everything. And you know when you've arrived, if you're in a classroom, administrators or anybody else, and the teacher is working and they are changing, going from one exercise to another, and there's a routine in doing that, and the kids start correcting each other about no, do it this way, that means that teacher is doing a fantastic job. And if you're a teacher on this call and you have kids that correct each other about the routines in the classroom, congratulations, you are doing a fantastic job. And then the students have to have routines. How many times have we seen Johnny needs to get his pencil sharpened and he hits every kid on his way to the pencil sharpener in the head with his pencil. When he gets there, he grinds down his pencil so it's only a nub. Oh, my pencil's too short now. I got another one. We waste 10 minutes at the beginning of the school period trying to figure out how to get our pencils. No, we have a routine. You walk to the pencil sharpener in this way. It takes us so we're not walking past other kids. When you get to the pencil sharpener, you are allowed to turn the pencil sharpener 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can't do it more than 5 times. Or if it's electric, you can push it in for exactly 3 seconds. Whatever it is, I don't care what your routines are. You know your rooms. You know what they have to be in your schools. Routines for everything. And principals, administrators, routines for big activities. How do kids go into assemblies? We have routines for how that gets done. And then we get rid of some of the problems there. Routines for it all. How we walk up the bleachers without falling and creating a joke. Practice that stuff. Teach it. We talked about teaching. Okay, taking too long. And here we go. State, teach, and review the expectations. Teach the rules. You got to teach this stuff. Teach the routines. I'm going to jump forward here a little bit because I don't want to take too much time. I want to provide more acknowledgments for appropriate than inappropriate behavior. And now we get into correction. We all understand that I see Billy sitting there not doing the work. Susie is doing the work. It's much better to go over to Susie as you look at Billy and say, Susie, you're doing a great job. Way to go, as you look at Billy. And hopefully he gets a message and he starts doing it. And you say, Billy, good job. Thank you for doing the work. I've now given 2 positives rather than 1 negative going over there yelling at Billy. Now, you can't avoid correcting and negative interactions entirely, but we need to do a better job of these kinds of things. We need to then know that Johnny isn't going to do the work now. I need to get him. He's concerned about about being embarrassed and not knowing the work, and so we're going to act out before I get asked to read because I know I'm going to be embarrassed because I don't read well. So we have to think about those things. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. We have to interact with all our kids once every 5 minutes. And so now we go back to your teacher coaches. How do you ask questions? That becomes important as part of engagement. And does our lesson plan have time for feedback? Because that's an important issue. And that leads us right to this. Do we have opportunities to respond? We can't tell Johnny he's doing a good job if he never has a chance to say something or do something. So build in, and our teacher coaches help with this, build in lots of opportunities here. Maximize active engagement. Again, vary the format. We need to actively engage to get cognitive engagement. We talked about those kinds of things. We have to actively engage. We have to specify what we're going to do and link the engagement with outcome. And this is good teaching things. We're not going to go into this too deeply, but these are things that we need to see in the classroom. And anybody can go in the classroom and see if the teacher is engaging the kids. We know we have some teachers that love to sit behind their desks. Some teachers have physical reasons why they tend to do that, but we've got to get the teachers up and moving around the room. We have to do it. This is one of the reasons I hate these online presentations, because if any of you have ever been with me in a live PD, I'm all over the place because I really try to model this. You have to be up and around and moving continuously. You know, if you work in education, you signed up for two things. You signed up to go home tired at the end of the day. Sorry, that's what you signed up for if you're in education. And unfortunately, you got signed up for not making a ton of money, not making as much money as your colleagues in business do. So that's what you signed up for in education, folks. Be tired at the end of the day and not make as much money as we're worth. But here's the deal: you can go home tired because you've been fighting with kids all day, or you can go home tired because you've been teaching hard all day. And it's much better to go home tired because you've been teaching hard all day than it is because you've been fighting with kids. And one of the things that you do, you can get your steps in here, get up and move around. You need to watch teachers and observe them about this. Respond to inappropriate behavior quickly, positively, and directly. This will be a whole other presentation. We can spend a couple of hours on this because we know that we have teachers that escalate behavior. And all of us need to be aware of that. We have to help our teachers learn not to escalate behavior. And if there's not handouts in the Padlet now, I'll be sending some additional ones on how to not escalate behavior. If you enter into a power struggle with a student, you have lost. Even if the principal drags them kicking and screaming down the hallway to the office by the scruff of their neck, if you enter into the power struggle, they have gotten reinforced and you've lost. And this goes back to motivation. We have to understand the motivation, and in many, many cases, entering to the power struggle is feeding their motivation, and you've just reinforced their behavior. Again, things you can do is attend to the students who are displaying the appropriate behavior. You have to follow school. I mentioned this earlier. If you have major problem behaviors, you have to follow the school rules on those. Coach Jones not sending the kids down to the office for fighting or not reporting the fight. They may not have to go to the office, but has to be reported. Okay, number 9, how do we acknowledge appropriate behavior? This is the reward system, the acknowledgement system. Again, I like acknowledgement. And so we have to make sure that when you're watching the teachers, are they reinforcing positively? Some of it can just be good job. Once you get to know the kids, it could just be a thumbs up or a wink. But we have to make sure that we're seeing lots of acknowledgement. It might be that you put a token economy in. Good job. Here's the bear buck or the school dollar or whatever it might be that you can use to go to the school store or go, when you're going to be able to go to the party or whatever it might be. Again, be careful about those, and we'll do a whole session on how to do reward sessions at some point. But it's critical that we do a good job and we understand how to acknowledge behavior. And we need to acknowledge behavior understanding the function of behavior. For example, if we have a child that exhibits attention-getting behavior, that's the function of the behavior. And by the way, in South Carolina, the 2 major functions of behavior that get kids sent to the office, once you get away from just saying disrespect or disruption, are attention-getting behavior, and the other is avoidance of work. So if we have Johnny with attention-getting behavior and Miss Smith is the teacher, she can sit there knowing that by 10 o'clock, he's going to blow because I haven't given him enough attention. And she can sit there and say, okay, I know what's going to happen at 10 o'clock. I'm going to send Johnny to the office. Or she can say, you know what, at 10 o'clock, I'm going to ask Johnny to take the lunch orders down to the office for me and tell him good job when he comes back. Or I'm going to use the old red file technique. Do you all know that one? Here's a great trick for you. Try this one. You have a red file. Get your teachers to pair up with another teacher. Yeah, they have a red file that's got some official looking documents in it. Don't mean anything. At 9:50, when Johnny always blows up at 10 o'clock and he gets sent to the office 3 days a week at 10 o'clock, and by the way, drives the principals and the administrators crazy because they say, Johnny's down here again, 10 o'clock, same time for Miss Smith's class. They don't understand, administrators don't understand why that happens. And Miss Smith says, I send Johnny down there every day at 10 o'clock and that doggone administrator didn't do anything to fix him. Why can't that administrator fix Johnny? Didn't he learn that when he was getting his admin degree? Doesn't he have some magic pixie dust he can sprinkle on Johnny and make him behave now? Doesn't work like that. But what the teacher can do is at 9:50, change their behavior, give Johnny the red file and say, Johnny, I need for you to take the red file over to Miss Smith's room or Miss whoever's room because she needs this information. And he gets to get up, go over there. The other teacher says, thank you so much for bringing it to me. Great job. When he goes back, he gets another positive reinforcement for taking it over. And they send that red file back and forth between each other whenever they need to. Send it down to the guidance counselor. Send it down to the principal or the assistant principal if they're willing to be part of the process. Or you can have them do, something for real. But make sure that we have and we create ways to acknowledge kids. Teaching, we need to be able to acknowledge the behavior too. So how do we acknowledge when the kids are doing the schoolwork right? That goes back to the engagement. And here's different ways to do it. And then provide specific feedback for errors and corrections. And this goes back to those rules hanging on the wall I was talking about. If you got that matrix, that old PBS matrix hanging on the wall, it should be used. And that means when you tell the kids good job, you say good job because you showed respect like you're supposed to in the classroom. Respect in the classroom is one of the things we have. Or if you're correcting the child, we look at the matrix and say, you weren't showing the right kind of safety, that what you did wasn't safe. And that's one of our expectations, to be safe in the classroom. So we continually reinforce whenever we interact with the kids. That's why I said, if that matrix is hanging on the wall and it's not being used, do away with it or get the teachers to use it. And that continually reinforces these expectations we have. If the matrix isn't a good way to do it, come up with some other way. But the teachers need to reinforce the expectations when they're correcting and when they're praising, whatever the expectations are. And then everybody knows what this school is about. That changes the school climate more than anything. But get your teachers doing it. And then the new teachers, look at the old teachers, share power. How do they do that? How do they reinforce the expectations? Give them some examples. Have them stand next to them on the playground if they need to for a while so they can see how it's done and share some of that power. Use the same language. Okay. So we have the 10 items that anybody can go in and look at the school teacher and understand, are they doing these things or not? Okay. Now, I'm going to go one step farther here for you. We're going to make this thing even better because what I have, not only do we have the expectations, the self-check list of 10 things, it's a one-pager in the Padlet, I also gave you a document that has a couple of pages on each one of these 10 things. So for example, and this document is how we can make a plan to improve these things in the classroom. So if you're a teacher and you went down and you know what, I'm not doing number 2, I'm not doing number 5, and I'm not doing number 7, you go into this packet that is in the Padlet, and I go to number 2 and I say, okay, here's some things that I can do better, and I'm going to make myself a little plan to improve. Okay, administrator, imagine a teacher that comes to you and says, I went through the 10 items and I'm not doing number 2, 3, and 7. And so I came up with this little plan to improve 2, 3, and 7. As an administrator, what do you think about these? Wouldn't you love to hear your teacher saying things like that to you? Fantastic. Or if you're a counselor, you can say, well, I got some ideas, maybe you can help on these things. Or for anybody. I know Johnny's in the class and doing this kind of thing would be helpful to him, having more explicit routines. So I don't know what I can do any easier. I gave you the checklist. The teacher can do it themselves. You can go in and do it. And then I gave you a little booklet here where they can they can work on planning and fixing these things. Here's another one. Post-teach review and reinforce the expectations that we talked about. How are they doing that in the classroom? How are we doing that school-wide? How is the nurse doing that? What are the expectations down in the nurse? If nurses are funny. Kids go to the nurse to avoid things quite often. But if the nurse has their expectations on why you come and when you come and how do you do it, it'll cut some of that stuff out. They need to do these things too. And then here's some common routines. That actually goes with some samples of routines, because routines, I think that was number 4. And these are the kinds of things that we have to have. What are some of them? And again, if you're in 12th grade, how do we pass out the materials without having craziness? Anyway, we got the idea. And here's the best one. Okay, we have these 10 things we're all looking for and that are going to help us with functional behavior. But then included in the Padlet are the ADEPT performance standards that teachers and other people in the school are going to be evaluated on, going back to these 10 things. So if the teacher comes to you and says, gee, I need to work on number 3, they can say, well, gee, that's helping me in ADEPT with 7C. I can't make it any easier than this, folks. This ADEPT performance standard rubric is in the Padlet as well. So I've now tied all these things together for you, and that's the best I can do for you, folks. Can't make it any easier than that. Okay. We're going to finish this section up here with this last slide. I think this is the last slide. When we're talking about interventions school-wide, what are we doing to prevent misbehavior from happening? How can we avoid the problem context? And to understand that, we have to understand the motivation of the child. You have to understand the motivation of the child. What do we mean? What is the trigger? So we have to think about function. We all have to become experts in functional behavior. And you have experts in your school that can share this information, your school psychologists. Some of your special ed teachers spend a lot of time looking at functional behavior. We need to share that with the general ed folks. Then we need to teach our expectations, teach our behavioral, what we want you, how we want you to behave, teach our routines. We have to recognize, again, positive reinforcement. When we do it well, we need to say, good job. We need to withhold rewards, or we need to have consequences, or more importantly, we have to consider the consequences based on the function of the behavior, because as I said, with some power struggles, we actually reinforce the behavior when we think we're punishing. And then, of course, we do have to have consequences that we have to think through. So the worksheet for teachers, what are you doing to prevent it? What are you doing to teach the behaviors you want? What are you doing to recognize appropriate behaviors? What are you doing if there's something reinforcing these kids? What is it? And in many cases, that's the most difficult one. Can we get rid of whatever the reinforcer is in our classroom or in our school? And then finally, when necessary, when we're not rewarding, what are the appropriate corrective consequences? That's what we have to think through. That is intervention in the classroom, intervention school-wide, intervention all the way across the school. And these same things are used for Tier 2 and for tertiary. So we go back to the very first slides we had this morning, and we're now going to start taking this up and down the triangle. We're going to Tier 2. We have Tier 2 in the classroom. What is the teacher doing different with Johnny? What are we doing different to make sure this works? That's a kind of Tier 2 intervention. But now we're going to talk next about some of the Tier 2 interventions school-wide that folks like counselors, social workers, school psychs, administrators are responsible for getting into place. That's where we're going next. That's the next session. Okay. Whew. We're just about break. We have a couple minutes before the break starts, about a minute and a half. Any questions about this? It's really important to start in the classroom to start understanding function of behavior. Everybody with me? Questions?
I don't have a question, but I guess I have a comment.
Okay.
I think teachers fail, and I never really thought about breaking up engagement and those type of behavior, emotional and cognitive. I
Right.
think it's either have one or more of those things, but not all three. And I think that, and because I'm not a teacher, but I would think that if you don't have those three engagement functions in place, it could increase the behavior. So it is a good eye opener for me just to have those behaviors, to understand that engagement on that level. And also
Yeah.
as a social worker, sometimes we're in the classroom, sometimes we're not. But I feel like some teachers feel offended when we go in there and observe the class because they have administrators coming there a lot. And then here
Yep.
you as a social
Yep.
worker, you come in there and say, okay, you don't have as much in behavior, so some teachers could get offended, and that could
Yeah.
be, that could be
Yeah.
comfortable after a while if you always come to the classroom, even though little Johnny is in there, just doing the most. And you say, okay, well, let's try this. And some teachers are offended. And because they
Yeah.
have so many other things they have to do, that is really not high on the priority list.
Yeah,
So
that's a great point. That's a great point. And two things. Whoop, I had my timer here, so I'll just quickly respond to you. The first thing is that whole discussion about engagement, the three levels, behavioral, the lowest level, emotional, and then cognitive, which is where we're trying to get as a school. That was a good just way to frame it to get you to think about it, and I'm glad it gave you that different way of thinking about it. That's fantastic. I would say from a practical standpoint, if you are a person going in, particularly if you're a person who has a caseload, so I took it you're a social worker, I could have been wrong, but if you have a caseload, the way that you can do that and be non-threatening to the teacher is by using your student and say, I was here and boy, John, I've done a lot of work with Johnny, and Johnny's one of those students that really needs to have a lot of routines for him. And so I find when I work with him, if I have routines, he does better. So you might think about implementing routines for Johnny in your class. Now, what happens with that, hopefully, is that, geez, do you have a routine for Johnny? Well, I can't do something special for him. Well, but maybe we can make the routine work for him better. And so you go into it that way with who your client is, and not go in saying you're doing a crappy job as a teacher in this classroom, because that's not what we want to say. They're struggling like everybody else. So maybe we can go in, from your student standpoint, and now rather than going from the group of students up to the individual, you go in and you talk about the individual student, and the teacher sees how they can push that down to everybody else. That's a bit of a concept there, but think about it in that way. Work in your expertise, because you are the expert on that child. And so do it in that way. And that's a much more non-threatening way to do it. Great question. I don't want to take our break anymore. We'll see you back in 10 minutes. And now we're going to really get into motivation and tier 2 interventions for school-wide as a group, and move out of the classroom into broader areas. Fantastic job, everybody. See you in 10. All right, all right. Hey, everybody coming back. Fantastic. Give you another minute to kind of settle in. Y'all are doing great. Really appreciate the attention. It's hard. We all got used to Zoom and Teams and virtual during the pandemic. And I must say, a lot of us, it was so great to get back and see people face to face. So I'm happy to do this because we can get all over the state this way. But I am looking forward to the time where we can see each other face to face. I think uh, I, the opportunities there are just so great, and enjoy seeing everybody in person and seeing the reactions and what we can do. All right, so we're going to get started. Everybody's
And-
slipping back into their desk. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
And Dr. Stevens, I was going to say, you do have a couple of people that are agreeing with you. And if it's better for you, when you're doing your engagement and asking questions, if you would prefer for people to come off mic and to verbally engage instead of in the chat, that might help
Sure.
you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I love to get comments and discussion, particularly if I love to be challenged on it. That's, because those kinds
Okay.
of discussions are the most valuable ones. So don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to do that. That's
Well,
great.
so I hope everyone heard that. So when we're having discussions, please unmute yourself to speak, and so Dr. Stevens can engage with you, and then you can kindly mute yourself back after you've given your comments.
There
Thank
you
you,
go.
Dr. Stevens.
Yeah, absolutely. We spent a lot of time there talking about the classroom. And I tried to give a tool that you could look at in the classroom and look for some fairly simple things to help with the process. One of the things we know about all the work we do in the school, particularly around behavioral health, is we have to be prepared for what may happen. And this particular case, again, at the beginning, we heard from folks who said they had, we had kids coming to school that had a lot of baggage that we needed to be able to work with. We had kids that clearly had some issues and needs that were, the kids had needs that we needed to have some real effective ways of addressing. Do remember that when we talk about behavioral health, we're talking about moving. There's no magic bullet. There's nothing that I can tell you to do that all the behavior is going to go away. What we're always trying to do is to reduce inappropriate behavior, increase positive behavior, and move down the triangle. We're trying to take kids who have needs at the highest level, up at the top of the triangle, tertiary needs, and make it so they have needs, responses. We have to have responses for that, and make it now that our secondary responses can effectively impact them. And kids with secondary needs to do such a good job that now we can respond to their needs at the universal level. And it's all about pushing down. It's not going to go away, but it's all about improving the climate, improving our responses, and that's really, really, really what we're trying to do here. And to do that, we're going to talk now a lot about function of the behavior. What's causing the behavior? We've alluded to it, and that's really the key. And we're going to want our teachers to start thinking about function of behavior. So those 10 things that we talked about in this last session, if we understand function, we can implement those much better. So we need to prepare. We have to prepare for those issues we know are coming into. What can we do to prevent the behavior before the development of the problem behavior? And that's the critical thing that the teachers need to do in the classroom. I know Johnny operates out of attention-getting behavior. So rather than wait for him to blow up, I'm going to give him some attention. And then what we do is we start training and shaping him. This is old ABA stuff, applied behavioral analysis. MTSS and PBIS, quite frankly, is applied behavioral analysis for the entire school. That's really what we're talking about. and we start shaping the behavior. So now Johnny, I know he gets antsy and he needs attention. So before he gets to the point where he explodes or does something to get attention inappropriate, I give him some attention. I change my behavior as the adult and give him some attention to eliminate that. And then if I know that he has to have some kind of reinforcement every 30 minutes,
Needs to have this
I
update
then,
completed.
yes.
I'll
yes,
take
we
one just in case
do.
she says.
Can you please mute your mics, please?
All right.
And
We're gonna mute that one. Thank you.
That off one of those things and do a little explanation on the back. Okay. And then the nurse already gave her like the contact part.
Sarah, can you mute your
Okay.
mic?
I might just.
Okay, I found her. I'm sorry, Dr. Stevens.
That's quite all right. No worries. So what we want to do now is what can we do to prevent? So like that extension with Johnny. Well, rather after 20 minutes, I'm going to give him the red folder, or I'm going to go have him sharpen a pencil, or I'm going to give him some attention. And then what we have to do is a secondary intervention tomorrow or after a week of that, I'm going to make him go to a half hour, but at 20 minutes, I'm going to go over and give him a thumbs up. And I've told him beforehand, I'm going to have you do the red folder today, but I'm going to have you do it at 10 o'clock rather than at 9:30. And at 9:30, I go over and I give him thumbs up and say, you're going to be doing it in a little bit. Good job. And we start shaping the behavior by looking at the function of the behavior. So before the development of the behavior, we're going to do things to prevent it. And to be able to do prevention, we know that we have to understand the function of the behavior. This is the summation of the last section. Then we're going to do redirection. What do we need to do early in the behavior sequence? What are we going to do to intervene? What are the plans? What are we going to do with the folder? What are we going to do to whatever we're going to do? We have Johnny. I said that the second biggest reason for misbehavior was avoidance of work. Well, we have Johnny in high school who can't read well, or middle school that can't read well, and we're asking everybody to read out loud. Well, you darn well know that he's going to act out before he gets embarrassed in front of the classroom. So before we do reading, we say, Johnny, I know you're struggling with this. We're going to be asking kids to read read in front of everybody. I'm not going to ask you to do it. And so when it comes time to read, you have all the students read and you say, oh my gosh, it's time for recess. Johnny hasn't had a chance to read. Everybody go to recess. Johnny, would you just sit here and read with me? I'm sorry, I'm making you miss a little bit of recess, but I need for you to read to me a little bit so I can hear you read. But all the rest of you go on. You know, these are the kinds of things that the teachers need to think about and change to prevent, to intervene, and to prepare. So this is what we're going. And again, this is a slide that I love. It's all fun and games until someone figures out the function of your behavior, your motivation. Everybody in the school, teachers, psychologists, nurses, social workers, administrators, all need to be thinking about why students are doing what they're doing, what the function of the behavior is, because that way we can change what we do to address that function of behavior. So this is a critical piece right here. You've all been in Psychology 101. Kids do things for two reasons. They do things to obtain something, get something, or avoid something. Either to obtain it or avoid it. There are a few other ones in here that, you know, power struggle, but that's to gain attention and so forth. But we all know that these are the functions of behavior. So we have to understand those things. Okay? I'm not going to go through this. You've all heard this before, but it's true. And so when we're thinking about function, we need to be thinking about this all the time. Now, when we're thinking about motivation, go back to the slide I had earlier. With motivation in mind, do we prepare differently? Do we have some different prevention tools in our folder? Do we do redirection a little differently than we might have done, understanding the motivation and understanding our kids? Does it affect our intervention plan? And how about when it's chronic? What is chronic? What's the motivation for chronic kinds of behavior? How do we anticipate and prepare for it? Because we know it's going to happen. We can't get rid of all the behavior. So think about that as we're moving forward. Again, we need to redesign the environments, not redesign the students. When I get the administrator that says, I got a real problem with Johnny, can you come fix Johnny? The first place I have to go is, what are we going to do differently based on what he's doing? We have to look at the behavioral function of the motivation. And all of those things that you mentioned earlier, the community, the family, the school itself, they all play into that. We mentioned things like ACEs, and we have to understand those things to be able to make the change. All right. Here's another thing that I want you to do. I think that we have pushed this for years and years, but quite often when we have office discipline referrals, listen carefully to this. When we have office discipline referrals, we need to collect who did it, what they did, and again, we are no longer accepting that they were disrespectful. You have to say specifically what they did, who did it, what they did, when was it done, because we find out with some kids we have poor behavior on Fridays and Mondays because they act out before the weekend when they're not going to be in school. The school is the one place that has some consistency in their lives, and after the weekend they may misbehave. We see that quite often. Who, what, where did they do it? In the classroom, during reading time, on the playground? Where did it happen? Who, what, where, when? Again, what time, which day? But then finally, we have to include the why. So the two big differences that we must make sure that we understand is specifically, what did they do? Can't put down disrespected me. How did they disrespect you? And by doing that, it allows us to understand the why. What the motivation? Were they obtaining attention? Was they obtaining adult attention? Was it to obtain items? Were they stealing things? Were they avoiding their peers? Or avoiding the adults? Were they avoiding the task or activity? We might include power struggle. Were they power struggling here? You can add some other things to it. But these are the key ones that we know, and we have to be collecting this information. So two things you have to change. You can't put disrespect down anymore or disturbance. I need to know specifically what was done because that will help me understand the motivation. And then you also must put the motivation. And if you don't know, get your best guess. And if you don't know, if you're a teacher, ask the school psychologist to come and help you understand it, or the social worker. And if you're a social worker, a school psych, or a counselor and you don't understand, get a psychologist to sit down and help explain the two. We all need to understand these. Now, it's not a science, but by doing this, we will really start to understand the student better. Then the teacher can apply those classroom interventions we were talking about in last section. And then we can also do something school-wide here. We don't have the resources, and school psychs spend most of their time doing evaluations. We don't have the time to evaluate every child and track them one-on-one. We just don't have the resources for that. So we have to do some things in Tier 2. And Tier 2 in South Carolina generally is not done very effectively. Counselors that are here, many of you do social skills groups. That's a Tier 2 intervention. Some of you may have some mentoring things going on in your school. That's a Tier 2 intervention, a check and connect. Some of you may have check-in, check-out. That's a Tier 2 intervention being done school-wide. We've looked at the data and our team has said this child needs to go into this Tier 2 intervention. How we get them there is this motivation piece. It's critical. It helps our teachers do the interventions that they need to do in the classroom before we get to this point. And then when we have that information, it allows us to select the right Tier 2 intervention. So here's where we're going. Functional behavior assessment. We've all heard that. School psychs hear it all the time. I'm going to do a formal functional behavior assessment. That's a diagnostic tool. We don't have time to do that with everybody. So we do need to think about some informal thinking about functional behavior. Functional behavior is motivation. It's the same thing. So direct observation, what teachers, if you're having a problem with Johnny, start keeping a little record of how many times these things were attention getting or they were avoidance of work. And just keep an informal collection of these things. We have some checklists like the one I just showed you. Let's check those and see where the issues are. Go back and see what the student has done in the past. Go back and look in PowerSchool. Look in the other records that we have. Collect some of this information, and then we're going to do some things to get the student put into the correct Tier 2 interventions. So we're going to look at classroom behavior reports and interviews and things. We're going to scatter plot, the time of day that this Johnny's misbehaved. We're going to look at an ABC chart, which is an antecedent chart. What all the time Johnny misbehaved right before when? It's always when we're getting ready to do reading. That tells you something. So you just keep track of these things and in a way, and that will help us. And the office referrals, making sure that we say, this is exactly what Johnny did, and this is what I think the function of behavior was. Even if you're not an expert, what you think it is goes a long way to helping us make decisions about how to create interventions for Johnny. And then we create a hypothesis statement. I'm not going to go into in a lot of detail on this, but we want to create a statement to why we think this is occurring with this student. Because you all have some chronic students. So and rather than just throw up your hands and say, I can't do anything, let's try to create a hypothesis about why it is, because then we can do something concrete to address it. You're going to be with this,
Bob,
you're going to be,
Bob,
yes.
I'm
Yep.
jumping in because I'm like you, and when I'm
Absolutely.
presenting, I like for people to talk. I can't stand everybody
I
to
want
be
to
on
hear
mute.
it.
But I
Absolutely.
think that one of the things and kind of what you're saying is that we just have to be curious, and we
Mhm.
have to be curious enough to investigate and find ways and think about as many possibilities as possible so that we
Right.
can, our goal is always the same. The goal is
Right.
for the student to be successful. So I think being curious is
Absolutely.
one of the things that we have to make sure
Yeah.
teachers are knowing. Like, we're not going to just let the kid keep misbehaving, but we
Correct.
are going to be curious about what we can do to change our behaviors to help the kid.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. And the other thing is ask for help. And I know the problem with teachers, and I have been a teacher. Okay. I've been a teacher. Before, that was where I started, and I was a teacher for 10 years. When these things are coming at you fast and furious, how can I do that? How can, I got so many other things going on, particularly now with all the paperwork we have to complete and everything else. What can I do? But you need to start trying to collect this as best you can and ask for help from some of these experts. The question earlier about, gee, I'm hesitant when I go in the classroom to say something to the teacher. Be there to help them. Say, I'm going to help you come up with some of these. I watched them. Let's sit down and talk together and see if we can figure this out together. What's going on with Johnny, and then maybe we can come up with a solution. So you're exactly right. And any other question? I don't want to just talk over. Any other questions? Any other thoughts?
I would think also when we're doing these assessments, on the particular student, let's say Johnny is running around the classroom and you're targeted on Johnny. But if you look at Susan, she's doing the same thing that Johnny is doing. So you're really not seeing that it's really not Johnny, it's Susan, but because your attention is so focused on Johnny, you miss a whole mark, which again, you miss interventions, having the right interventions and all of that. So as teachers and anybody that's doing, functional behavior, need to understand the content around that kid as well as that kid and the teacher. So it's a group effort.
I love you.
What are you
Thank you.
laughing, Doctor?
Thank you. Because that's what I was trying to say last session. We need to redesign that whole thing because it'll affect 2 or 3 or 4 kids. And here's the thing. If we make our classroom set up for the kids we're having problems with, it doesn't hurt the other kids. more structure doesn't hurt kids kids that are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's right. And I heard somebody else chiming in, please. Go ahead. Oh, maybe not. Okay. We're going to continue working. So when you think about these kids, create a hypothesis statement with your kids that need more interventions. Those kids that need more. Think about the hypothesis statement. When Johnny, throws a fit in the classroom or throws his book down, and again, being specific, he's but when we get into reading and Johnny throws his book down, he's doing this in order to, get attention or avoid the work or power struggle, and put that function down in there. And if you do this 2 or 3 times with the kids that you seem to have more difficulty, you'll start to see the pattern. And so that allows us to do some other things. Now, we get to the nitty gritty for the school-wide. Administrators, listen to this carefully. MTSS, student information team leaders, listen to this carefully. There are 5 kinds of Tier 2 interventions. There are 5 categories of Tier 2 interventions. The first one, the one that you probably all have, are social skill training groups. Most often done by the school counselor. Other people might do it. Could, social worker or others could do it, but a lot of times this is where the school counselor is. The second kind are kinds of secondary interventions that are designed for self-management. And this is where we're trying to teach kids to manage themselves. The best example of this is check in, check out. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another kind of Tier 2 intervention are mentor kinds of interventions. The best example of that, used quite often in high school and upper elementary grades, is Check and Connect. There is another category called peer tutoring and a peer network. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We can do that in a later date. This is a tough one because you got to make sure you're having kids working with kids. You got to make sure the kids know how to do it. It's one that takes a lot of planning, a lot of selection of kids. So we're not going to talk too much about that one today. It's one that's very effective, but it takes a lot of setup and so much so that I'm not going to go into it now. And then lastly, we have academic tutoring. Tier 2 academic supports. So we know, for example, reading, school-wide reading intervention is our reading curriculum. What are we doing with our reading curriculum? We know if the child at a Tier 2 level needs some extra work, maybe we put them in a smaller group. Maybe we put them in a group that has other students that have same kinds of behavior. Maybe we send them to the lab and use one of the education reading series on the computer. That, even though it's an individual, that's still a Tier 2 intervention because that computer is used for all kids that fit into this category. Remember, I defined Tier 2 earlier for y'all. It's important to understand that. Something that's not individualized. And then finally, you have, individual reading. We used to reading what used to be reading recovery, where it's an individual reading diagnostic work that's done individually for that child. That's your tertiary. Well, you got the same thing here. We're interested now in the Tier 2 ones. And so how do we get kids into the right Tier 2 on behavior? So we're going to talk specifically here about social skills training, self-management, and the mentoring ones. But these are the plans that you should be thinking about for Tier 2 outside of the classroom Tier 2. This is the school-wide Tier 2 interventions that you might have. The problem is, how do we know that we get the kid in the right plan? We know when we're doing tertiary that we have a formal diagnostic workup. But to get them in Tier 2, we don't have the time. I started saying we don't have enough people to do the diagnostic. We have to have some way of matching the student with the behavior. And this goes back to the motivation. So here is that school matrix of secondary interventions. There is a handout that has about 5 pages that goes through this in detail in the Padlet. But for what we're talking about now, I want us to think a little bit about these groups. I hope you can read this. I can read it on my screen. If you can't, open it up on the Padlet. It's in there in the secondary intervention document that's in there. Okay, think about social skills training, social skills groups. The foundation of this is in the character-wide education. Counselors, you should tie it back to your character ed program using the same kind of language. You're building relationships within the building. Now, here's the thing. We now have collected information about motivation on our kids, right? Because now we know to do that. We can do a better job in the classroom, but we've collected it. So we know that if we have kids that are stealing things or avoiding peer attention or obtaining adult attention, revenge or power struggle, social skills group is a good match. So if Johnny has a whole lot of these categories, we know that this is a good match for him, and we're able to place the kids in the appropriate tier 2 intervention with this informal matching. Here's the other thing that goes on, and I don't know if there's school psychs on here or not, but school psychologists, if you get a referral or social worker or mental health counselor, if you get a referral from somebody on Johnny, I know you have to do your diagnostic work. I'm not saying you don't for a tier 3 intervention, but wouldn't it be helpful to you if the teacher sent the behavior information to you with what they thought the function was, and then that you knew that the tier 2 intervention that they had that maybe wasn't working well was at least matched with some of the behavior that the kids were showing. So we're really helping everybody up and down the chain. And this becomes that communication I talked about at the beginning, not just across silos or across triangles, but also up and down the triangle. The motivation that the teacher has seen has informed us about our tier 2 intervention. The success of the tier 2 intervention helps the tertiary intervener, the person who's doing tier 3 interventions, understand and know what they have to do with the child. So I've given you a way to go back and forth sideways on the triangle, but also up and down. Self-management, check in, check out. The focus is on academic and social compliance. Agendas, all staff reinforce. This is great for students who obtain adult attention, obtaining attention, and also check in, check out's a good one if you're not sure where they are. Mentoring, same thing. So here, what I've done is by looking at structuring the classroom, getting to that function of behavior and understanding that allowed us to come up with a system to put our tier 2 interventions in place. Anybody have any questions about that? But try to go on here, move a little bit more quickly. We're getting to the end of the morning, and I appreciate your listening so much. Done a great job. So we have 3 goals for our tier 2 interventions. We're going to address motivation, we're going to reduce problem behaviors, and improve inappropriate behaviors. And what tier 2 interventions need to do is to try to make our bad behavior irrelevant to them, going to fix it in them, inefficient and ineffective, and they found that they can get their motivations, they can get their motivation addressed in other ways other than inappropriate behavior. That's what we're trying to do. Trying to substitute appropriate behavior for inappropriate behavior, and our tier 2 interventions help us do that. And if we do that well, we'll never get to tertiary. We'll never get to tier 3, to the red zone. Okay. One of the things we have to do is, again, monitor it, because I've seen, and I love counselors, I love you, and we have the social skills group, but we also have to say, what is our goal of the social skills group? What are we trying to accomplish? What changes do we hope to have with these kids? Sometimes, social skills group is great. It's a lot of kumbaya. The kids want to be there, but we have to have goals, and that way we can measure our outcomes. How are we going to do? Well, what are we going to measure? Report from home? Number of office referrals? That one probably not so good. It might be sitting down with the kid periodically and telling us how they're feeling about things. All kinds of data can be collected. and you have to you have to find the right one for you. So I'm not suggesting it is always going to be how many reduction of office referrals. School administrators like that one, and I understand, when they want the kids sent to the office, they're not learning when they're in the office. But it could be other things that we're looking at too. And talking with the parents, engaging the parents, which was a discussion at the beginning. That's a whole other session on how to engage parents. But asking them whether they've seen a difference can be helpful. And that helps engage them because they know you're working on behalf of their child. Then what decision rules will be used to decide if we should change it. I've seen check in, check out, where a kid gets put in check out at the beginning of the year and they're still on at the end of the year, the same program. You failed if you've done that. Those things need to be modified. We look at our progress monitoring. Gee, we find out with check in, check out that we're really having much more difficulty in the afternoons with the check in, check out than in the mornings. So you know what? We modify the check in, check out. We don't bother to have them check in the morning. Now he starts checking in at lunch. Or the days we're having the hardest time are on Mondays and Fridays. So we do check in, check out on Monday and Friday, but we don't do it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday after a while. We adjust it. And hopefully it fades. And eventually we don't have to have it. Now, there's some kids that, boy, they love the check in, check out. They want to stay in it. And I get that. But then you can make it easier on yourself. You can do it, but not take as much time with it. But it should be fading and should be changing. All these tier 2 interventions could be the same way. And even the social skills group. Kumbaya, love having you. And sometimes they're just going to keep doing it because we love the kids so much, and that's fine. But we should have goals that we're set and we're trying to reach. And just having the group to have the group isn't effective. We need to, what are we trying to accomplish? And who's monitoring it? And rather than call it, for your school psychs there, rather than call this a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, I call all these tier 2 interventions behavior education plans. They don't need that formal diagnostic. But we have matched the kids using our motivation with the appropriate tier 2. And we're going to look at student outcome data. We're going to identify who needs the appropriate intervention. We're going to this is what I've been saying, ongoing progress monitoring to look at our data. And then we're going to exit or transition the youth off the interventions when appropriate. And it might be that the tier 2 intervention isn't enough, and part of that is going to a tier 3 intervention. And we have an intervention process. This is what our MTSS teams should be doing. Okay. We have a self-assessment action planning tool. How do these things work? I'm going to skip forward on this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the behavior education plan. This is a part of one. And in this case, it's a behavior education plan for check in, check out, how that works. We have this information, some of this information for you in the Padlet. We'll give you more information. And at one of our future PDs, we're going to go in depth into check in, check out, how to make it work, how to do it. But this is some sample information on that. Social skills instructional groups. There are 3 kinds. Pro-social skills, problem-solving skills, academic behavior skills. May involve a progress report. Sometimes our social skills groups, we haven't included the progress report. We need to do that. They're often facilitated by our social workers and our counselors. Here's some core skills that can be taught by social skills groups. Here's what, if you have a social skills group, think about the core skills that you have and what you need to be thinking, what you need to be doing. Don't just say we're having a group for that sake. What are we doing? These are some of the classic ones, the core skills that should be taught. Effective communication, perspective taking, developing friendship skills, problem solving, sharing. These are some samples. So make sure when you set up the group, it is, yeah, we're going to do whatever it might be, etiquette, might be an etiquette group or a SIRS group, that's great. But underlying, these are the things that are being taught. And we should have goals for them. And we should ask the kids, do you feel like you can communicate better now? You can rate the kids if they're taking better perspective They see a better perspective. You can rate them. That's the kind of data. And then finally, check and connect, which is mentoring. This is more individualized than check in, check out. You have one student to one adult, and even though it's one-on-one, it's still tier 2 because it's in a structure. It isn't individualized. We're all using the same checklists and so forth. More focus on relationships in the building. Might include a daily progress or a weekly progress report, may not, depends on how you set it up. And you can set these things up to be appropriate for your school. We're happy to do that. Every school, it might be a little bit different from one school to the next, simply because of the adults you have in the building, the parents that you're dealing with, and also the structure of the school. Obviously, question earlier, it could be set up a little differently for elementary than it would be for middle or for high school. There would be differences. We're all going to have tier 2 interventions, but the structure is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to go into the competing pathways, but know that what we're talking about here is simple interventions, not complex diagnostic work. And that's the problem people have understanding tier 2. We need to have data to put the kids in the right tier 2 intervention, but we have to do it in a way that can be done easily, doesn't take a lot of time, is not this full-blown 6-week evaluation, because we can't do that with all the kids. That's why I call it a behavior education plan rather than a behavior intervention plan, than a BIP. A BIP has a different connotation. Okay, and everybody's got to be able to access information up and down the triangle. How that's going in these groups needs to be communicated with the teacher. Counselors, you have to say, here's a term that I use in my social skill group that seems to work with this group. Maybe you should use this term too. It also goes back to the expectations. If we have school-wide expectations, the school-wide expectations and classroom expectations where this kid is sitting need to be used in the social skills group. So that's why having school-wide expectations makes it easier. We can all use the same language. If you don't have school-wide expectations, then counselor, you got to go to that classroom teacher and find out the expectations that they have. Because remember, when I started this, the teachers have to have expectations in the classroom, whether they're created by the school or just them, they have to have them. And these expectations and the vocabulary that's being used, you have to know in your tier 2 interventions. The mentor in Check and Connect has to know so they can reinforce those terms. This is how we move up and down the triangle. And it takes a little time, and that's why we started out with working smarter, because we got to get rid of committees and work that's not accomplishing anything, or join them, put them together so we're not doing extra work, because we don't have time to do all the silly things that we don't get a payoff on. Whoop. Is that it? That's it. I'm at the end. Holy cow. You guys are fantastic. We've covered so much territory, some in detail, some not in detail. And some of the things, what I would like you to do is to communicate back with Kim in her office, those areas that you'd like to see a deeper dive on, and we'll prepare information on those things. And my holy cow, we're 10 minutes early. Whew. I'm done. I'm exhausted. And I want to give everybody here, I'm giving you all a big round of applause for hanging with me. Great job, everybody. I appreciate it. You all are wonderful. Thank you.
It was great information, Dr. Stevens. So at this time, I am going to read in the chat here. If you joined with a team, because I think some of you may have been in one office together. If you did so, make sure that you email your names to DC Wiley at ed.sc.gov so that we can capture your attendance. Or you can also write your name in the chat so that we can have that. Before I finish with some closing remarks, do you all have any questions for Dr. Stevens? We're going to open it up and let you unmute and come off and talk to him. Leslie, I'm looking at you. It looks like you want to say something.
Well, I'm always the one that talks in meetings. It's because I've presented a lot and I know how much it helps, get through things. But I think the resources are great. for those of us that are not actually teaching in classrooms, just having some of those resources. And I love the action steps resource where we can look at things that we may notice and be able to give teachers concrete ways that they can change something. And, you know, so I appreciate that. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Would like to see
Any
more,
other-
and I don't know why I'm excited about the engagement, because I just realized that is so very, very critical and crucial to all of the things that you've talked about, all the resources, because if you don't have that engagement, there's no way you're going to be able to put in place the rest of the things or the rest of the resources or incentives and all of that. It seems like it would be a broken system if the child or student is not engaged in the beginning. So if you have
Well,
a deeper dive in the engagement process, I'm in.
Okay, we'll absolutely, I'll share some of that information. There's not too much of that in the Padlet, but I'll make sure some of that data, some of those sheets and information gets sent out to y'all. And
I really
I'd
believe
love to
like
do a session on
engagement-
it. Yep.
I believe engagement is probably just and I tell my teachers here that when we're talking about MTSS, I'm like, and you said it at the beginning of your presentation, that engagement piece, that good teaching is your #1 preventative measure for behavior issues in your classroom. So I think that just that engagement and working with teachers in a PLC process even is a tier 1, is a layer of tier 1 that I think sometimes gets overlooked.
Thank you for that. Yes,
Good
absolutely.
point. Good point. Anyone else have any questions or comments before we do our final closeout? Okay, so all hearts and minds are clear. So you do have the Padlet with all of the information that Dr. Stevens shared today. And so his contact information, I'm sure, is readily available in some of that material as well, right, Dr.
Yeah,
Stevens?
Yep,
Okay,
absolutely.
so then, so
and a
great.
lot of you, I know a lot of you guys because I've seen you around from time to time. That's a function of longevity, not necessarily expertise. But I see Teresa there who's a good friend and other folks. So I'm available, happy to come and talk. We can work through Kim if you would like, and just let me know and we do follow up. I got follow up today with a group in Sumter County. So looking forward to it.
So great. So our hope is to have Dr. Stevens come back and do some additional training for us as well. And just a couple of reminders that the evaluation will be sent out on Tuesday. Monday is a state holiday. I'm not sure for schools if Monday's a holiday, but it is a holiday for us. So we will send out the evaluation to this training on Tuesday. And also, just a heads up for those Stronger Connections grant contacts, we do have a joint meeting on January the 22nd. If you've not received anything, let me know. But January 22nd from 10 to 11:30. And those are usually the folks that are managing the Stronger Connections grants in your district. So we do have a joint meeting on the 22nd. Again, evaluations will be sent out. You do have Dr. Stevens' contact information. So if you want to follow up with him, please do so. We thank you all so much for your time and sharing your morning with us. And it appears that everyone really got something out of it. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Stevens. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and we greatly appreciate all of the things that you have to offer. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And so with that, I am going to turn it over. I'm going to stop the recording, and you all get back to your day and have a great weekend.
Sure.
So I'm trying to stop the recording.
Let me see if I can stop it on my end, Kim.
Okay.
There we are. I have stopped the recording and the transcription. It takes